Rain poured over the quiet corner of the town square, soaking Sophie Reed as she sat shivering on the wooden bench, clutching her empty paper bag. Chloe Miller, wiping down the last table in her small diner, noticed the pale girl with wide, fearful eyes and a trembling hand. Without hesitation, Chloe grabbed a warm loaf of bread and a bottle of milk, placing them gently in front of Sophie, whispering, "Here, this is for you." A few onlookers snickered, doubting the waitress's kindness, but Chloe's gaze held steady, unyielding. Sophie's fingers hesitated over the food, then she smiled, a tiny flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. The next morning, whispers swept through the town as Sophie returned to the square, carrying not just a warm smile, but a newfound courage, and Chloe's quiet act began to ripple outward, changing the way everyone saw her and the world around them, leaving them all wondering what other miracles might be quietly waiting to unfold. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Chloe Miller said softly, her voice carrying over the drizzle as she stepped out from the warm glow of the diner into the gray morning. Sophie Reed shivered under the umbrella of a crooked tree, her thin coat soaked through, eyes downcast, and hands clutching an empty lunch bag. The town square was quiet, cobblestones slick from overnight rain, the smell of wet leaves mingling with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from the diner. Chloe approached slowly, not rushing, letting the soft clatter of her shoes on the wet pavement announce her presence. Sophie looked up briefly, blinking against the rain, uncertainty and a flicker of hope crossing her face. Chloe held out a small paper bag with a warm smile. "I brought something for you. It's not much, but it should help for now." The girl's fingers trembled as she took it, the weight of the simple gift somehow grounding her. Around them, the townsfolk began to stir, but no one interrupted, their morning routines unfolding like distant background noise while Chloe and Sophie existed in a bubble of quiet attention. "You're going to be okay," Chloe said, leaning lightly against the corner of the diner, her eyes steady on Sophie, projecting reassurance without needing to force it. The wind picked up, scattering droplets across the square, and Sophie hugged the bag to her chest, a tentative smile forming as warmth spread through her fingers and up her arms. Chloe watched her for a moment, letting the silence linger, the drizzle tapping a rhythmic pattern against the awning above, creating a calm cadence that filled the space between them. Sophie's eyes shifted to the faint reflections in the puddles at their feet, the town buildings blurred in the wet sheen, and for the first time that morning, she didn't feel invisible. The ordinary sounds of the town, the distant hum of cars, a dog barking, the scrape of a broom against wet wood, combined into a quiet symphony, highlighting the small miracle of care that had appeared in her morning. Chloe turned back toward the diner, her hand brushing the door frame as if anchoring herself to the warmth she carried out, and Sophie remained on the bench, opening the bag to find a sandwich wrapped carefully, a bottle of milk, and a handwritten note that read simply, "You are seen." Her lips parted slightly, the words sinking in, the smallest shift in expression signaling the beginning of courage she hadn't known she possessed. The morning light broke slightly through the clouds, casting a soft sheen on the wet pavement, illuminating Sophie's face as her shoulders straightened, the weight of loneliness beginning to lift, replaced by the first hints of hope and connection. Chloe's presence receded slowly, but the impact of her action lingered, a quiet, almost imperceptible ripple that would reach far beyond this single moment, leaving Sophie ready to face the day, and leaving the town unknowingly on the edge of witnessing a chain of kindness that could change everything, hinting that this small morning encounter was only the beginning of something larger that no one yet could see. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the small town, casting a golden glow across the wet streets and illuminating the windows of the diner where Chloe Miller had worked the night before. Sophie Reed sat at the edge of the town square, the paper bag from Chloe resting on her lap, slightly crumpled from the dampness, but still warm with its contents. Her fingers lingered on the sandwich, the bottle of milk, and the note, reading and rereading the simple words, feeling the weight of someone noticing her, acknowledging her existence, and for the first time in weeks, a small smile crept across her face. She looked up at the streets around her, noticing the familiar shops, the baker unloading fresh bread, and the ice cream truck parked by the corner, all ordinary elements of her world, now seen through a lens of possibility and quiet hope. Chloe arrived at the diner, the bell over the door chiming softly as she entered, carrying the scent of brewed coffee and fresh pastries, a subtle reassurance that the world outside was continuing, and that kindness had its place in the rhythm of everyday life. Inside, she moved with practiced ease, arranging trays and refilling coffee cups, but her mind kept drifting to Sophie and the gentle courage she had witnessed the morning before. The town, still waking and starting their daily routines, remained largely unaware of the impact that a single act of care could have. Yet Sophie's quiet transformation began to ripple outward as she walked past neighbors, nodding tentatively and returning smiles where before she would have looked away. Children playing in the street glanced at her with curiosity, a few pausing to wave, and Sophie responded, her voice soft and confident, a stark contrast to the timid murmurs she had whispered to herself just the day before. The small moments compounded. A shopkeeper called out a greeting, a mail carrier tipped his hat, and Sophie felt the strange thrill of recognition, of belonging in a place that had felt so vast and indifferent. Chloe, watching from the diner window, caught sight of Sophie crossing the square with an umbrella that no longer seemed too small for her frame, and she felt a quiet satisfaction, not from pride but from the awareness that her simple gesture had sparked a shift, a tiny but undeniable spark in the fabric of the town. Sophie paused at the fountain in the center of the square, her reflection catching the morning light, seeing herself not as the isolated girl she had been, but as a part of the rhythm of the community, a single note in a larger melody, capable of carrying warmth and attention wherever she went. Chloe, finishing her shift, stepped outside briefly, breathing in the crisp morning air, noticing how the sunlight danced off the wet pavement, reflecting gold and silver across Sophie's face, highlighting the lift in her shoulders and the confidence growing in her stride. Passers-by glanced at Sophie, sensing something different in the atmosphere, some small change that made them look twice, and Sophie carried herself with newfound poise, the simple act of being noticed and nourished having opened a door to a world that had seemed closed. The town square, ordinary and familiar, had become a stage for subtle miracles, the small kindness of one person radiating outward to influence the quiet rhythm of the day. And as Sophie reached the steps of the library, she turned briefly to glance back at the diner, a silent acknowledgement passing between her and Chloe, a wordless understanding that the ripple of compassion had begun and that it would not end here, leaving a sense of anticipation and curiosity lingering in the air for what might unfold next in the day ahead. By midday, the town square was filled with the soft hum of everyday life. Children laughing as they played hopscotch on the damp cobblestones and merchants arranging fresh produce outside their shops. But Sophie Reed moved with a quiet purpose, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with a new attentiveness. Each step she took felt lighter, more deliberate, as though the small warmth she had received earlier from Chloe Miller had anchored a steady rhythm in her chest. She paused at the fountain, watching the water ripple in concentric circles, and for the first time she noticed the subtle interactions of the townspeople around her, the nods exchanged, the brief smiles offered without prompting, the way the sunlight glinted off window panes and puddles, casting fleeting rainbows across her path. Chloe, stepping outside the diner with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, observed Sophie from a distance, noting the transformation that even a morning could bring when care was extended without expectation. Sophie approached the bakery on the corner, greeting the owner with a soft, confident good morning, and was met with a warm, surprised smile that acknowledged the shift in her demeanor. The act of receiving kindness had sparked a ripple, and now Sophie was the conduit, passing it gently into the fabric of her community. As she moved past the benches and lamp posts, a group of schoolchildren looked up from their game, momentarily distracted, and Sophie offered a polite wave, feeling a swell of confidence as their laughter softened into attentive curiosity. Inside the bakery, the scent of fresh bread and pastries filled the air, and Sophie lingered at the counter long enough to engage in a brief, earnest conversation with the baker about the best bread for a picnic, her voice steady and clear. Outside, Chloe returned to the edge of the square, her eyes following Sophie as she continued onward, witnessing the subtle but profound change in how Sophie interacted with the town around her. The light shifted, casting longer shadows as the afternoon sun climbed, and Sophie paused at the bench where she had sat the day before, placing the paper bag beside her, now empty, a small smile lingering as she reflected on how a simple act of kindness could transform a morning, a mood, and potentially a lifetime. Passers-by glanced at her with mild surprise, sensing something different, something quietly remarkable in the way she carried herself, the lift in her posture, the steady cadence of her steps, and in that moment, Chloe felt a quiet fulfillment, knowing that the morning's warmth had set in motion a chain of connection that would continue to unfold, each small interaction carrying the resonance of care, attention, and the beginnings of hope, leaving the scene poised at the edge of something larger, something waiting just beyond the square, a hint of potential yet unseen, a promise of more quiet miracles to come. As the afternoon deepened, the lights softened across the town square, bathing the wet cobblestones in warm amber hues and highlighting the steam rising from the bakery ovens. Sophie Reed continued her careful walk toward the little park on the edge of the square, each step measured but confident, her small backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. She paused to observe the children playing on the swings, their laughter carrying through the crisp air, and noticed a small boy struggling to balance on the edge of the slide. Without hesitation, Sophie adjusted her pace, approaching him with gentle words and a patient smile, offering a guiding hand that steadied his small body without drawing attention from the other children. The boy looked up at her with wide eyes, a mix of surprise and gratitude, and Sophie nodded reassuringly, feeling an unexpected swell of warmth in her chest as he regained his balance and continued his game with renewed confidence. Across the square, Chloe Miller watched from the diner window, noting Sophie's growing ease and natural instinct to help others, the small gestures creating ripples that extended beyond the immediate moment, touching the hearts of those nearby even without their full awareness. A group of townspeople walking past paused briefly, catching glimpses of Sophie assisting the children, and a few exchanged whispers, marveling at the composure and kindness emanating from the young girl, an acknowledgement that something quietly extraordinary was unfolding. Sophie then moved toward the fountain at the center of the park, where the water glinted in the afternoon sun and the reflections danced across her face, capturing her renewed sense of purpose and gentle courage. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small sketchbook, flipping through the pages to reveal carefully drawn pictures of the square, the diner, the bakery, and the children she had helped, each sketch imbued with the simplicity and sincerity of observation, capturing the ordinary moments that now felt infused with meaning. Chloe stepped outside, holding a cup of tea and leaning against the edge of the diner, watching the subtle exchanges between Sophie and the people around her, recognizing that the morning's act of care had initiated a quiet transformation, one that would continue to unfold as the day progressed. Sophie paused, taking a deep breath and surveying the square, noticing how the sunlight warmed the wet pavement, how shadows stretched longer with the afternoon sun, and how the laughter and movement of the town had a rhythm she could now feel attuned to, a pulse she could contribute to rather than be overwhelmed by. A gentle breeze shifted through the square, carrying the scent of baked bread and damp leaves, mingling with the warmth rising from Sophie's small but growing confidence. And as she began to walk back toward the diner, Chloe offered a subtle wave, a silent acknowledgement that Sophie's presence and small acts of kindness were already creating a resonance beyond their understanding, leaving an unspoken promise that the day would continue to unfold in ways filled with warmth, connection, and the quiet power of generosity. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm, honeyed glow across the town square, Sophie Reed felt a new sense of confidence settle in her chest, steady and reassuring. The fountain glimmered in the soft light, each ripple catching the colors of the sky and reflecting them in Sophie's wide, attentive eyes. She noticed an elderly man struggling to carry his groceries from the market stand, and, without a second thought, Sophie moved toward him, offering her hands to help balance the bags and steady the weight. He looked at her with mild surprise, then gratitude, and his face softened as he nodded with a quiet, appreciative smile. Nearby, Chloe Miller watched from the diner's window, her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips, feeling a warm pride in witnessing Sophie extend the morning's act of kindness into the afternoon, carrying the spark forward into the world around her. Sophie placed the groceries carefully on the man's porch, adjusting the straps and making sure nothing would spill, then offered a small wave, and he returned it with a gentle chuckle that seemed to echo through the square, blending with the distant hum of conversation, footsteps, and the soft murmur of the fountain. As she walked back toward the center of the square, Sophie noticed children gathered near a small flower stand, struggling to reach the colorful blooms at the top of the baskets, and she bent slightly to hand them down safely, their giggles and squeals of delight mingling with the scent of fresh petals in the crisp air. The town seemed alive in a new way, each small act of care creating threads of connection that Sophie could see and feel as she moved, the sunlight now softening into long shadows that danced across the wet stones and glimmered off the shop windows. Chloe stepped outside for a moment, the air cool and filled with the faint scent of baked bread, and she observed Sophie from a distance, noting how naturally the young girl had begun to engage with the world, how her presence was quietly commanding attention and respect without a word, a testament to the gentle power of consistent care. Sophie paused at the edge of the square, looking at the warm lights spilling from the diner, the fountain rippling before her, and the people around her carrying on with subtle, ordinary routines that now felt touched by a quiet change. She realized that small gestures, offered with sincerity, could carry more weight than she had imagined, transforming moments, moods, and even the way a town interacted with its own heart. The shadows deepened slightly as the day progressed, and Sophie turned to take one last look at the square, feeling the pulse of life and connection she had helped nurture, a sense of anticipation humming in the air as though the town itself were holding its breath, waiting to see how these tiny acts of care might continue to ripple outward, leaving room for more quiet, meaningful changes to unfold. Chloe Miller stepped back inside the diner as the late afternoon sun began to cast long, golden beams across the square, lighting the edges of the wet pavement and glinting off the fountain at the center. Sophie Reed lingered near the benches, her sketchbook now open to pages filled with careful drawings of the town, the bakery, the fountain, and even Chloe herself, capturing the small but significant details that had marked her day with quiet significance. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh bread and damp leaves across the square, and Sophie traced her fingers over the sketches, feeling a connection not only to the scene she had witnessed, but to the people who had made them feel alive. Across the square, a small group of children had gathered near the fountain, curious about the drawings and whispering to one another as Sophie approached, offering explanations in a gentle, measured tone that invited their attention without demanding it. Chloe, wiping down the counter and glancing out the window, caught sight of Sophie guiding the children to notice the patterns in the rippling water, the colors reflected in the wet cobblestones, and the subtle movements of passers-by, and she felt a quiet sense of pride, knowing that her earlier gesture had sparked this engagement. Sophie knelt slightly to point out the shapes that sunlight created on the wet ground, and the children's eyes widened as they began to see the ordinary surroundings in a new way, noticing the interplay of light, shadow, and color that had previously gone unseen. A few townspeople paused in their routines, glancing at Sophie with interest and admiration as they witnessed her gentle influence on the group, and the town square, once simply a backdrop for morning errands and conversations, now seemed alive with subtle shifts in attention, empathy, and awareness. Sophie closed her sketchbook for a moment, letting her eyes wander across the square, observing how her actions, guided by care and observation, were beginning to resonate beyond her own experience, creating small moments of understanding and connection in the people around her. Chloe poured herself a cup of tea, stepping outside to breathe in the crisp, early evening air, and she watched as Sophie guided the last child to safely step off the fountain's edge, a quiet acknowledgement exchanged with a small nod that spoke volumes without words. The shadows lengthened further, and the golden light softened, highlighting the gentle changes in posture, expression, and movement that had begun to appear across the square, subtle but undeniable, each person touched in a small way by Sophie's calm presence and the ripple effect of Chloe's morning kindness. Sophie paused to look back at the diner, seeing Chloe wave softly, and she waved back, feeling a growing sense of belonging and purpose that had been absent in the morning, her heart steady and her mind alert to the possibilities of connection and understanding that continued to unfold around her, leaving the afternoon poised for further quiet miracles yet to reveal themselves. As the evening deepened, the town square glowed under the warm lamplight, casting long, soft shadows across the cobblestones that shimmered faintly from the afternoon rain. Sophie Reed stood near the fountain, her sketchbook closed now, tucked securely under her arm, and she watched as the last rays of sunlight danced across the rippling water, highlighting the gentle curve of the fountain and the subtle glimmer on the wet stones. Children laughed softly in the distance as they headed home, their shadows stretching long, mingling with the silhouettes of townspeople walking leisurely along the sidewalks. Sophie's eyes traced the faces of the people passing by, noticing small gestures she had not seen before, a nod exchanged, a smile offered without expectation, a pause in the hurried rhythm to acknowledge another person's presence. Chloe Miller stepped outside the diner again, holding a cup of warm tea, her gaze settling on Sophie as the young girl began helping a small boy untangle his kite string, guiding his fingers carefully without speaking too much, her movements deliberate and calm. The boy's smile was radiant, his laughter ringing out and mingling with the gentle murmur of evening conversation, and Sophie felt a steady warmth spread through her chest as she witnessed the joy her small action had created. Across the square, a few shopkeepers paused, noticing the care with which Sophie interacted with the children, and the subtle shift in their own expressions reflected a dawning recognition of kindness in motion. Sophie walked slowly along the edge of the square, offering brief greetings to the townspeople she passed, her voice soft yet clear, each word carrying an ease and confidence that had grown throughout the day. The fading sunlight caught the wet cobblestones and glinted in the windows of the surrounding buildings, painting the square in hues of gold and amber, and Sophie paused briefly to admire the scene, feeling connected to the town in a way she had never felt before. Chloe leaned against the diner doorway, observing Sophie's interactions with a quiet satisfaction, noting how naturally the young girl had begun to influence her surroundings, creating moments of attention and care without fanfare or expectation. Sophie knelt slightly to adjust a small birdhouse at the edge of the park, ensuring it was steady and safe, and she glanced up at the lamplight reflecting in the windows, feeling the pulse of the town's life and the subtle resonance of her own actions blending seamlessly with the rhythm around her. The evening air carried the faint scent of baked bread and damp leaves, and Sophie inhaled deeply, feeling a grounding sense of purpose and connection that had begun with a simple gesture that morning. As the sun finally slipped behind the rooftops, leaving the square bathed in a gentle twilight, Sophie turned to look back at the diner where Chloe stood, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A recognition that the morning's act of kindness had rippled outward, quietly transforming the rhythm of the town, leaving space for further warmth, understanding, and small, meaningful miracles yet to unfold. The evening air grew cooler as the sky deepened into shades of violet and indigo, the soft glow from the street lamps reflecting off the damp cobblestones and creating shimmering patterns that danced beneath Sophie Reed's feet. She lingered near the fountain, her sketchbook now tucked safely into her backpack, the pages filled with drawings that captured the warmth, movement, and subtle details of the town that had welcomed her so gently throughout the day. Children ran past her, their laughter carrying through the air, and Sophie smiled as she noticed one little girl struggling to carry a small basket of flowers, the stems catching in the handle and threatening to spill. Without hesitation, Sophie bent slightly and guided the basket with steady hands, her voice soft and encouraging as she said, "Here, I will help you." The girl looked up with wide eyes, a bright smile spreading across her face, and she nodded gratefully before running off to join her friends. Across the square, Chloe Miller watched from the edge of the diner, leaning lightly against the doorway, her eyes following Sophie's movements with a mixture of pride and quiet admiration, noting how naturally the young girl had begun to engage with her surroundings, creating small acts of kindness that echoed beyond her immediate actions. Sophie then approached a small bench where an elderly man had paused to catch his breath, adjusting the strap of his grocery bag, and she offered a polite nod and a gentle question. "Would you like me to help with that?" His face brightened, and with a slight chuckle he accepted her assistance, the weight of the bag feeling lighter as Sophie guided it carefully to his porch. The sound of her footsteps, soft and deliberate, mixed with the distant murmur of conversations, the faint clatter of dishes from the diner, and the gentle trickle of the fountain, all blending into a quiet symphony that seemed to underscore the transformation in the square. Sophie paused briefly at the fountain, gazing at the reflections in the rippling water, noticing how the lamplight created streaks of gold and amber that danced across the surface, illuminating the damp stones and the faces of passers-by with a warm glow. Chloe stepped outside again, holding a steaming cup of tea, and watched as Sophie adjusted the petals of a small flower arrangement near the fountain, her hands precise and gentle, her presence calm yet attentive, drawing the attention of those nearby without needing to speak loudly. Townspeople began to glance in Sophie's direction, their expressions softening as they noticed the deliberate care in her movements, the way she paused to observe and assist without drawing attention to herself, creating a subtle ripple of admiration and quiet inspiration. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and she turned her gaze to the horizon, where the last light of the sun touched the rooftops, knowing that the small acts of connection she had performed throughout the day were beginning to weave into the larger rhythm of the town, creating an undercurrent of warmth and attentiveness that promised further quiet miracles as evening settled over the square, leaving both her and the people around her on the cusp of continued discovery and gentle transformation. Sophie Reed walked slowly through the town square as twilight settled over the rooftops, the lamps flickering on one by one and casting pools of golden light on the damp cobblestones. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of baked bread from the diner and the earthy aroma of wet leaves scattered across the sidewalks. She paused near the fountain, where the water shimmered in the lamplight, and noticed a group of townspeople gathered nearby, their attention drawn not by noise but by the calm and deliberate way she moved among them. Children waved as she passed, their faces lighting up at the sight of her, and she nodded softly, her presence gentle yet quietly commanding. Chloe Miller stepped outside again, wiping her hands on a clean towel, and leaned lightly against the doorway of the diner, watching Sophie guide a small boy as he carefully navigated the slippery edge of the fountain. The boy's small hands clutched hers, and he smiled with growing confidence, his laughter ringing clear and light in the quiet evening. Sophie's eyes swept over the square, noticing the subtle changes in posture and expression of the people around her, how their glances lingered a little longer, their smiles arrived a little earlier, and how the rhythm of the square had shifted, just slightly, in response to her attentiveness. She helped an elderly woman adjust her scarf, ensuring it was comfortable against the cool breeze, and the woman looked at her with wide, grateful eyes, nodding softly before continuing on her way. Across the square, Chloe observed the interactions, noting the ripple effect of Sophie's quiet acts, how small gestures of care could extend far beyond the immediate moment, influencing others in ways that were gentle but undeniable. Sophie paused to glance back at the diner, seeing Chloe's approving smile, and took a deep breath, feeling the steady hum of the town around her, the mix of footsteps, murmurs, and distant laughter blending into a comforting rhythm. She knelt briefly to adjust the position of a small group of flowers left near the fountain, brushing her fingers lightly over the petals, ensuring they were not scattered by the wind, and she stood slowly, surveying the scene with a growing sense of purpose and awareness. The light shifted again, shadows lengthening and softening, and Sophie felt the connection between her actions and the subtle transformations in the square, a quiet awareness that each act of care, each moment of attention, had contributed to a more harmonious environment. Chloe stepped back inside, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Sophie in the gentle glow of the evening lamps, and she lingered for a moment, taking in the full sweep of the square, the fountain, the people, and the signs of her influence, sensing that this evening was only the beginning of further quiet changes, and that the town itself was beginning to respond to the ripple of kindness she had set into motion, leaving anticipation and possibility lingering in the air for what the coming moments might reveal. The evening settled into a deep, soft blue, the glow of the street lamps stretching longer across the cobblestones as Sophie Reed continued her walk through the town square, the quiet hum of the town blending with the gentle ripple of the fountain. She noticed a cluster of townspeople gathered near the edge of the square, their expressions curious, their movements hesitant yet attentive, drawn by the calm and purposeful presence she carried. A young boy struggled to carry a small wooden crate of apples from the market, the weight awkward in his small hands, and Sophie moved toward him without a word, offering steadying hands and guiding him safely to a nearby bench. His eyes lit up in relief and surprise, and he whispered a soft, "Thank you," which Sophie acknowledged with a gentle nod and a reassuring smile. Chloe Miller stepped outside the diner again, sipping a warm cup of tea and observing the subtle interactions, noting how Sophie's attentiveness and small gestures had begun to shape the rhythm of the square, altering the pace of steps, glances, and even the murmurs of conversation. Sophie paused to look at the fountain, noticing how the light danced across the rippling water and reflected onto the faces of passers-by, each shimmer revealing expressions softened by kindness and care she had imparted throughout the day. She knelt slightly to adjust a fallen flower from the small garden at the fountain's edge, brushing the petals gently back into place, and as she stood, she caught the eyes of an elderly woman carrying a basket, who nodded in silent acknowledgement, recognizing the deliberate grace and compassion in Sophie's movements. Children laughed nearby, chasing one another in the fading light, and Sophie guided a small group to avoid slipping on the wet stones, her voice calm and clear, her hands steady, each action unspoken but full of purpose. Chloe leaned against the diner doorway, watching as Sophie moved seamlessly from one interaction to another, noticing how naturally attention and care could create a quiet resonance throughout the square. The lamp light glinted off the cobblestones, casting intricate patterns that shimmered in the gentle evening breeze, and Sophie paused briefly to admire the reflections, feeling the rhythm of the town pulse in harmony with her steps, her gestures, and the subtle shifts she had inspired in those around her. Each smile returned, each nod acknowledged, seemed to echo quietly across the square, a testament to the ripple effect of one person's thoughtfulness and patience. As the twilight deepened, Sophie turned toward the diner, catching Chloe's eye and exchanging a brief but meaningful glance, the understanding passing between them wordless yet profound, a recognition that the small acts of care, quietly sustained, had begun to change the town in ways no one could have predicted, leaving the evening poised with anticipation, as though the square itself were waiting to see what further quiet transformations might unfold in the moments to come. Sophie Reed lingered in the gentle twilight, the town square now bathed in the soft, amber glow of the street lamps, casting long, intricate shadows across the cobblestones that shimmered faintly from the day's earlier drizzle. She walked slowly toward the fountain once more, noting the subtle changes in the people around her, the ease of movement, the soft smiles exchanged, and the quiet curiosity that had begun to ripple outward from her own small acts of attentiveness. Chloe Miller stepped outside again, holding a warm cup of tea, her eyes following Sophie as she paused to offer guidance to a small child trying to tie the laces on a worn pair of sneakers, the child's face lighting up with pride and relief as Sophie's hands steadied him with patience and care. The soft murmur of conversations, the distant laughter of children, and the gentle trickle of water from the fountain created a soothing symphony that underscored the subtle transformations Sophie had inspired, each gesture of assistance leaving an invisible imprint on the rhythm of the town. Sophie knelt briefly to adjust a small basket of flowers left at the base of the fountain, brushing stray petals into place and ensuring the arrangement was secure, the delicate scent mingling with the cool evening air and carrying faintly across the square. She looked up and noticed a group of townspeople standing near the edge of the square, exchanging glances and whispering softly, their expressions softened, their movements less hurried, as though Sophie's quiet presence had encouraged a small shift in attention, awareness, and care. Children paused mid-laugh to observe her gentle interactions, learning, even in small ways, the impact of thoughtfulness and attention. Chloe sipped her tea, a sense of warmth and satisfaction spreading as she watched Sophie move deliberately through the square, each step measured, each gesture intentional, quietly influencing the town's atmosphere in ways subtle but undeniable. Sophie's gaze drifted over the fountain, its water catching the lamplight and scattering golden reflections across the damp cobblestones. And she inhaled deeply, sensing the pulse of the town, the rhythm of life influenced by her consistent attention to small, meaningful details. She guided an elderly man to adjust the strap of his coat and smiled encouragingly as he nodded in appreciation, his posture slightly straighter, his steps lighter as he continued on his way. The square felt alive in a different way, ordinary interactions now infused with care, awareness, and a sense of connection Sophie had fostered through gentle, consistent acts. She paused at the center, taking in the full scene. The fountain, the glowing windows of the diner, the soft flicker of lamplight, and the faces of those around her, all subtly altered by her presence, her patience, and her attentiveness, a reminder that even quiet acts of kindness could ripple outward to shape the energy and awareness of an entire community. Chloe glanced at her one last time before stepping back inside the diner, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Sophie standing alone but not isolated, enveloped in the gentle luminescence of the evening, ready to witness how the small gestures of one day could quietly transform the rhythm, emotion, and heart of a town, the potential for further subtle miracles hanging in the air like a promise yet to unfold. Sophie Reed paused at the edge of the square as the last traces of daylight slipped behind the rooftops, leaving the lamplight to cast a gentle glow over the cobblestones, illuminating the subtle reflections of the fountain and the surrounding buildings. She opened her sketchbook once more, flipping through the pages filled with observations, details, and small moments from the day, each one capturing the ordinary life of the town now seen through the lens of care and attentiveness. Children's laughter echoed softly from the distance as they returned home, their playful shouts blending with the quiet hum of evening routines, and Sophie noticed the difference in the way the townspeople now carried themselves, their gestures slower, their glances warmer, their smiles more frequent. Chloe Miller stepped outside one last time, the steam rising from her cup of tea mingling with the cool evening air, and watched Sophie guide a young boy to carefully cross a puddle without slipping, offering her hands with steady assurance while the child's expression brightened with relief and confidence. Sophie's attention to the smallest details, straightening a stray scarf, adjusting the position of a flower in a planter, ensuring a crate of goods did not tip over, created a ripple effect that spread subtly across the square, influencing the rhythm and awareness of the town. Passers-by paused mid-step to observe Sophie's careful movements, exchanging quiet nods and soft smiles, noticing the deliberate kindness and thoughtfulness she carried with every action, the way she seemed to draw people into the gentle flow of her awareness. Chloe leaned lightly against the diner doorway, sipping her tea and smiling faintly as she watched the interactions unfold, recognizing that the ripple of her morning gesture had transformed into a quiet chain of connection, with Sophie now acting as a catalyst for empathy and attention in the community. Sophie knelt briefly to adjust a small lantern on a bench, brushing her fingers lightly over its surface, the glow reflecting in her eyes as she surveyed the square, feeling the subtle harmony created by small, intentional acts of care. She rose and walked slowly toward the fountain, her footsteps measured, her posture upright and calm, and noticed the way the lamplight illuminated the wet stones, the fountain's water shimmering and casting patterns across the surrounding surfaces. Each interaction she had initiated carried a quiet weight, a shift in the town's rhythm, and she could sense the anticipation and attentiveness that had grown in the people around her, a recognition of presence, thoughtfulness, and care. Chloe watched one final exchange between Sophie and a young girl adjusting the ribbons of a flower crown, noting how effortlessly Sophie's actions inspired confidence, gentleness, and awareness in others. The shadows deepened, stretching across the square as the night settled in, and Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the town, the subtle resonance of her influence, and the knowledge that the acts of attention and kindness she had carried through the day had begun to take root, leaving a quiet promise that the town, its people, and the square itself would continue to reflect and respond to the gentle miracles set into motion, a soft, lingering warmth that hinted at more transformations yet to come. Sophie Reed stood in the center of the town square as night fully settled, the lamplight casting a gentle glow across the cobblestones, reflecting softly in the fountain's rippling water, and the air carried the faint aroma of baked bread and damp leaves. She glanced around, seeing the subtle transformations in the townspeople, the way a shopkeeper straightened his posture as he greeted her with a warm smile, the soft nod of an elderly woman passing by, children pausing in their games to watch her with quiet curiosity, and the gentle acknowledgement of those who had once been too hurried or distracted to notice one another. Each person moved with a newfound awareness, small gestures of care and attention echoing through the square in response to Sophie's presence, her calm and deliberate acts of kindness creating a rhythm that subtly reshaped the energy of the town. Chloe Miller stepped outside one last time, carrying an empty teacup, and observed Sophie guiding a small boy as he carefully placed a paper boat into the fountain, his eyes wide with fascination as the water carried it along. Sophie crouched to offer a steadying hand, her voice gentle and assuring, and the boy's smile widened, radiating a warmth that seemed to settle over the square like a soft veil. The shadows lengthened, blending with the glow of the lamplight, and Sophie adjusted a fallen leaf near the edge of the fountain, tucking it carefully so it would not obstruct the water's path, her actions deliberate, considered, and filled with quiet attentiveness. Passers-by glanced at her, their expressions softening as they noticed the care and precision in her movements, the patience and focus that invited them to see their surroundings and one another in a new light. Sophie straightened slowly, taking in the square, the fountain, the shops, the warm lights spilling from windows, the people she had influenced through gentle action, and felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of harmony that resonated within the rhythm of the town. Chloe leaned against the diner doorway, a faint smile playing on her lips, acknowledging without words the ripple effect that Sophie's attentiveness had created, the subtle yet profound impact on the community now visible in the softened expressions, deliberate gestures, and increased attentiveness of the townspeople. Sophie took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, and felt a steady warmth as she surveyed the square, sensing the unspoken gratitude, the emerging awareness, and the quiet joy that now spread through the town. Each reflection in the fountain's water, each flicker of light on the wet cobblestones, each attentive glance exchanged among the townspeople told a story of connection, influence, and shared humanity. As Sophie turned slowly to face the diner, she and Chloe exchanged a quiet nod, a wordless acknowledgement of the chain of small, deliberate actions that had brought about this transformation. The square was calm now, the soft glow of light and shadow mingling with the sense of anticipation in the air, a reminder that simple acts of care and attention could ripple outward, touching lives, fostering awareness, and quietly transforming the world, leaving the evening poised on the edge of possibility, with Sophie's presence at the heart of a gentle, unfolding change that promised even more warmth, connection, and quiet miracles to come. Follow the heartwarming journey of two extraordinary individuals, the kind-hearted waitress and the gentle blind girl, as their connection transforms an entire small town through subtle acts of care and compassion. Witness how the waitress's attentive gestures guide the blind girl through daily challenges while inspiring everyone around them, highlighting the profound impact of empathy and thoughtfulness in everyday life. This story captures the essence of heartwarming stories as the blind girl grows in confidence and the townspeople begin to notice the power of kindness, creating ripples of positive change that spread throughout the square. Chloe Miller and Sophie Reed's interactions illuminate the beauty of quiet heroism and deliberate acts of care, making this a perfect example of heartwarming stories that resonate deeply with audiences seeking inspiration and connection. Experience the tender unfolding of everyday miracles and the ripple effect of gentle guidance, reinforcing the timeless appeal of heartwarming stories as the community transforms around the actions of two compassionate souls, leaving a lasting impression of hope, empathy, and human connection in this captivating narrative. Image 1: white adult woman and white blind girl in a dramatic town square, facing a threatening figure. Intense expressions of determination and courage on their faces, dynamic body language, cinematic tension, evening light casting long shadows. Wet cobblestones reflecting soft golden and blue lamplight. Suspenseful atmosphere. Realistic clothing. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. 1, 2.